Hey friends, welcome to the Fairy Tale Thief, episode 8. I would like to say that we are getting close to the end, but in reality we're not. We still have 100 pages left. So I am plowing through, and thank you for joining me on this journey and on this experiment. I'd like to apologize. There's something of a party going on close by, and there's some noise that I wish wasn't here. I've tried all different rooms in my house, and so I'm back here in my office. So welcome. Here it is, episode 8. You are so fired, Brock said, trying to tamp down his rising emotions. He couldn't even define them. Was he angry, scared, maybe even a little relieved because here, finally, was someone he could share this with? He wanted to confide in Grace, but he didn't know the girl who was with her. And how could he do that? And how would Grace take it? And what would she do? Would he wake up tomorrow to find his house surrounded by news vans and reporters, all wanting to see a magic cupboard or a whispering painting or a singing flute? And what about the government? That's what happened to the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The government confiscated it and hid it in a big warehouse. And even though that was all just fiction, who's to say they wouldn't behave in exactly the same way? And what about thieves? Wouldn't there be countless people trying to steal something like this? He should get a dog, a really noisy dog. I know this doesn't look good, Grace began. The girl with Grace elbowed her. Show him the paper. Grace held out a paper and waved it at him like a fan. I really need my job. Her voice shook more than her hand. Brock's jaw tightened. You should have thought of that before you broke into my house. Just read that. The other girl snatched the paper from Grace and hit him in the chest with it. Brock took it from her, but he didn't look at it. Who are you? I'm Kelly, and coming over here was my idea, by the way. Bad idea, Brock said. Kelly bristled. Heck no, I found a magic cupboard. It belongs to my mom, Brock reminded her. Kelly jabbed him in the chest with a long, red, pointy fingernail. So, you admit it's a magic cupboard. I didn't say that. Just read the paper, Kelly said. It'll prove it. Brock studied it. This doesn't tell me what you're doing in our house. It's a fairy tale, Kelly said, as if that explained everything that couldn't possibly be explained. Brock lifted an eyebrow. Tell him, Kelly urged Grace. Everything? Grace squeaked. The dwarfs, Prince Charming? Grace flushed, watching Brock's face. An emotion he couldn't read flickered in her eyes. He'll think I'm nuts, Grace said. Yeah, well, right now he thinks you're a thief. Kelly grabbed Brock's hand and towed him toward the garage. I need something. Like a sedative, Brock muttered. He didn't, however, pull away. Kelly tugged her charm bracelet off her wrist. I just want everyone to know that I really like this bracelet, and I'm willing to sacrifice it. She opened the cupboard, placed the bracelet inside, and shut the door. Closing her eyes, she waited for half a second before reopening the door. Kelly screamed. Brock folded his arms and tried to look bored, but felt sick. A tiny, scruffy Yorkie barked. A dog, Brock's voice trailed away. A minute ago, he'd wished for a dog, and now here was one. Reaching inside, Grace pulled out the dog and cradled him against her chest. Is it one of Mrs. Robertson's? She asked. The dog snuggled against her, shivering. No, silly, Kelly shook the paper at Grace. It's one of the 3 dogs. In the story? Grace asked. Of course, Kelly shouted. I'm glad we got the little one, she muttered. Why did you wish for a dog? Remember, they can get you money, Kelly said. Go get money, she demanded of the dog. The Yorkie whimpered and cowered against Grace. What are you talking about? Brock asked, feeling shaken. Grace told him the Hans Christian Andersen story while stroking the dog's silky fur and trying to soothe it. I don't believe any of this, Brock said, even though he sort of did. Let's try it again, Kelly said, taking the dog from Grace. No, Grace said, backing away and shielding the dog. What if this time we get the soldier or the witch? Oh, come on, Brock blew out of breath. What are you even doing here? Grace asked. Why aren't you at the football game? Brock's lips pressed together as he searched for a biting retort. This is my house. I belong here. You do not. You're right. I'm sorry. Grace nudged Kelly. Let's go. She turned back to Brock. I deserve to be fired. Where are you going? Brock asked. Grace studied the top of the dog's head. I'm going to go ask Mrs. Robertson if this was one of hers. Do you think it is? Brock asked because he knew it wasn't. No. Where do you think it came from? He asked. Really? I have no idea. Tell me about the dwarfs again, he said. Why? So you can laugh at me? I won't laugh, he promised. You should. If I told you you were being followed by dwarves and Prince Charming, I would laugh. Brock swallowed. The decision came quickly. He didn't stop to wonder if it was a good decision or not. The secret fears had been hounding him for so long. The idea of sharing them nearly choked him with relief. Can you give us a minute? He asked Kelly. Why? Kelly assumed what Cordelia called the Wonder Woman pose. Hands on hips, chest thrust out, legs more than hip distance apart. Brock's voice faltered. He really hated the Wonder Woman pose. He'd seen his mom use it 100 times when she haggled over purchases. Here, Grace shoved the dog into Kelly's arms. Go and ring Mrs. Robertson's door and tell her a dog got loose. Kelly took the dog. She's going to know this isn't hers. Just try it, okay? Brock said with a strained voice. Kelly shrugged. This might be the stupidest thing anyone has done tonight. Kelly told the dog as she headed for the garage side door. Brock waited until she left before he turned to Grace. You can't tell anyone what I'm going to tell you. Can I keep my job? Grace asked. Brock waited for her to follow him into the kitchen. He pulled 2 sodas from the fridge, sat at the massive oak table, and motioned for her to join him. Last Christmas, a gingerbread man came into my bedroom. What? Grace pulled out a chair beside him and fell onto it. Brock held up his hands about 6 inches apart. He was about this tall. He said he was looking for his buttons. You were dreaming though, right? I thought I was until a few days later. What happened then? I found my mom in her workroom making brooches out of a collection of buttons that looked like candy. Grace stared at him. That's weird, but it's not puppies showing out of nowhere weird. You might think that until a walking, talking cookie wakes you up in the middle of the night and demands his buttons. He tipped his head back and took a long drink of soda. Besides, that's not the only time. Once, when I was training for a meet, I caught a fox watching me. Oh, where were you? Do they have foxes here? Laguna Hills. Another time, I saw 3 bears. I told my coach about them, but I didn't mention the middle-sized bear was wearing an apron. The coach called animal control, but of course, no one found the bears. He laughed. That's probably not true. Goldilocks found them. He looked out the window. I know it doesn't mean much. I know I should be shocked that my mom bought a magic cupboard that can produce fairy tales and stray puppies, but I'm not as surprised as I should be. He watched Grace's face, expecting her to jump up and run away or point a finger at him and call him a liar. When she did neither of those things, he added, and for the record, just now I wished for a dog, a noisy dog. That animal was my wish. Bracing her shoulders, Grace opened up. She told him about the dwarfs, Prince Charming, and the missing mirror. He raised his gaze to meet Grace's. Her dark blue eyes looked luminous in the shadowy kitchen. And you think my mom has something to do with the missing mirror? Don't you? After taking a long drink, he put his can on the table and pushed back his chair. Let's go. Where? We're going to inspect every mirror in this house. Grace hesitated. I don't know what a magic mirror looks like. Do you? No, he admitted. But maybe if we ask it. She grinned. You mean mirror, mirror on the wall, that sort of thing? Seems just as reasonable as conjuring up Yorkies. First, they tried the bathroom mirrors, followed by the large one in the entry, then Cordelia's room that looked like a 3-dimensional picture ripped from Architectural Digest today, and finally Brock's room. Feeling awkward, he was glad that Grace watched them from the hall as he confronted the mirror hanging over his dresser. It didn't respond. Maybe they're all dialed to mute, she said. He shrugged. Or maybe they're all from Ethan Allen. Or maybe, she suggested, we're just crazy people. Grace found Toby in the flickering gray light of the TV. He had the volume turned down so it wouldn't disturb anyone as he watched a rerun of a sitcom full of canned laughter. Hey, she said. Heather ditched me, he said, sounding happy about the turn of events. She said I could have ice cream if I didn't wake anyone up. A giant bowl with a spoon resting in it sat by his knee. But you're already awake, so you don't count. Good to know, she said, rubbing the top of his head. The canned TV audience hooted with laughter. She met some guy. He told her that she looked like someone he once loved. He talked funny. Suspicion tingled through Grace. Funny like how? Like this? She did her best friend's French accent. Hello, my name is Prince Charming. Toby nodded and tried not to smile. It's not nice to make fun of someone just because they sound like they've got boogers up their nose. True. Have you seen Kelly? Without taking his eyes off the screen, he bobbed his head. She brought home a puppy. Said his name is Hans. That's a stupid name. Might as well call him Fingers or Toes. Grace opened her mouth to tell him that Hans was a name as common as John in Sweden, but then she'd have to tell him about the Scandinavian countries, and she was too tired for a geography lesson. In her bedroom, Grace found Kelly buried in a quilt on her bed, the puppy Hans nestled beside her. She'd have to spend the night on the family room sofa where Toby was watching TV, but she could sleep in Heather's bed until her sister came home. But Heather did not come home. Chapter 14. It was still dark when Grace woke. The moon and stars sent a hazy glow into the room. Hans twitched his nose at her from the other side of the bed and let out a growl that sounded more amusing than scary. Kels, wake up! Heather shot a quick glance at the clock on the nightstand. 4 a.m. Kelly groaned and put a pillow over her head. Grace scrambled off the bed and padded into the family room, hoping maybe Heather had decided to sleep in there. The only thing resting on the sofa was Toby's empty ice cream bowl. Grace sat down and put her head in her hands. Where was Heather? What had Toby said about the guy Heather had met? Talked like he had a nose full of boogers? Where was Toby's cell phone? If it was in the room he shared with Jeannie, Heather was toast. Grace went to the mudroom, and to her relief, Toby's backpack hung on a peg by the door. She rummaged through it, struck gold, and turned on the phone. A text lit the screen. Gone to Sherwood Forest with a friend, XOXO. Sherwood Forest at 4 a.m.? Seriously? Built long before she was born, the Sherwood Forest theme park was the largest in the world. In fact, according to her dad, the parking lot alone was bigger than all of Salmondale. The park's slogan was, where fairy tales really do come true. Grace knew it was open until midnight, until after Labor Day, but she also knew that it wasn't like Heather to stay out until dawn. It was now more than 4 hours since the park had closed. She debated on whether or not to wake her mom. Grace crept past her mom's door to her own room. Heather didn't come home last night, she told Kelly. Kelly groaned, rolled over, and peeked open an eye. So where do you think she is? She said she was going to Sherwood Forest, but it closed hours ago. Kelly sat up, scooching Hans away and running her tongue over her teeth. What time does it open up? What? Kelly shrugged. Maybe she's still there. Grace chewed her lip, considering this. Toby said she ditched him for a guy who talks like he has a nose full of boogers. Kelly's lips twitched. I only know one guy who fits that description, Roy Charmant, a.k.a. Prince Charming. Kelly pushed her hand through her curls. You don't know that she left with him. Should we tell your mom? Probably, but I'd rather not. Any idea where the Prince guy lives? Grace shook her head. Kelly swung her feet over the side of the bed. Let's go to Sherwood Forest. Are you kidding? She shrugged. Why not? For one thing, it costs like $100 per person to get in, and for another, it's not open yet. The look in Kelly's eyes told Grace that a close sign wasn't going to stop them. They drove the 20 miles to the theme park in sleepy, tense silence. For once, the Orange County freeways were nearly empty. Let's just see if the Jeep is here. If it is, we can call security, Grace said, as she pulled the Grand Unit's Oldsmobile into the deserted parking lot. The sun had yet to peek over the top of the brown hills. In front of them, the faux, snowy peak of the Black Forest Mountain glistened. A robotic, abominable snowman with glowing red eyes stood frozen in place. The roller coasters loomed silent and still like giant abandoned erector sets. Only Sleeping Beauty's palace shone with lights. That sounds like an okay plan, Kelly said. Not as good as Starbucks or a donut shop, though. I don't think we're going to find Heather in Dunkin' Donuts. You don't know that. Kelly's gaze swept over the parking lot. I'm not seeing any cars. Drive closer to the gate. Grace rolled the Oldsmobile through the vast parking lot, feeling like an actor in an apocalypse-type movie. Kelly giggled. What? If anyone saw us in this car, they'd probably think we were pimps. Don't tell that to Grandpa Hank or Grandma Dorothy. Kelly stopped laughing and rolled down her window. I hear something, she said. Cut the engine. Grace obeyed and rolled down her window. A cold wind carried leaves, trash, and bits of paper across the lot. Grace held perfectly still, trying to catch what Kelly had heard. An owl, rustling in the bushes, and then a snatch of a tune. Kelly squeezed Grace's knee. Someone was singing inside the park. Come on, Grace said, pushing out of the car and quietly closing the door. Kelly followed. A giant hedge separated Sherwood Forest from the outside world. A fat, substantial padlock secured the large wrought iron gates. Although Grace couldn't see them, she guessed that security cameras hid among the trees. Kelly nudged Grace. Smell that? The scent of baking bread wafted through the air. Donuts, Kelly breathed. The restaurants must start baking early. Grace bounced on her toes in an effort to get warm. I bet they have their own entrances. We just need to find one, Kelly said. Because we're worried about Heather, right? Not because we want donuts. There's nothing wrong with wanting both. Kelly took Grace's arm and pulled her closer to the hedge. They followed the sidewalk to where it ended at a gate. Now, not only was there aroma from the bakery mouth-wateringly escapable, but the singing was louder. Heather's clear, high soprano mingled with a rich, full tenor. The beauty of it tugged at Grace's heart. She stood on her toes to see Heather and Charmant holding hands, sitting on the side of the Black Forest Mountain, singing their lungs out about true love triumphing all. Grace didn't hold out a lot of hope for princes or dreams turning into reality. It sucked that Heather had to drop out of art school and move to Southern California because her dad was an insensitive baboon and the moronic military thought they needed him. It hurt that her grandparents were such tightwads and so entitled that they believed her mom should give up her life to serve them. It killed Grace that Heather had to leave friends in Oregon and was forced to spend Friday nights hanging with their little brother. And it really blew that after Heather finally found a guy she liked, he happened to be a fairy tale character involved in a centuries long-term relationship with another fairy tale character. Not that Grace knew exactly what that meant, but she was pretty sure she had a better idea than Heather, and not just because she'd been paying attention to the bedtime stories her mom had told. Kelly, who stood a good 8 inches taller than Grace, and therefore didn't need to stand on her toes to watch the doomed love story playing out on the other side of the hedge, grabbed Grace's arm. We have to stop this, right? Grace agreed with a nod. I mean, he's gorgeous, but isn't he married to Snow White? Grace took a long, slow breath, trying to come up with a plan. Nothing came to mind, so she just called out, Heather! Heather froze. Turning, she saw Grace and Kelly. A sheepish grin covered her face. What are you doing here? She yelled back. Looking for you, Kelly said. Come on, we have to go home, Grace insisted. Heather cocked her head, considering. No, I don't think so. Heather! Grace walked back on her heels and for a brief moment lost sight of her sister. This is so not like her, she muttered to Kelly. Look at how she's glowing. Grace went back up on her toes to watch her sister. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Maybe she's just happy, Kelly suggested. I think he's put a spell on her. Oh, Kelly breathed. Grace grabbed the hedge. It scratched her in return, but she didn't care. What are you doing? Kelly hissed, grabbing onto the waistband of Grace's jeans. I'm going to get her. How? You think you can carry her out of there? Kelly demanded. I have a better idea. She took a deep breath before calling out, Security! Heather grabbed Roy's hand, and together they darted into the artificial trees. Great, and now they're gone, Grace said. A big, beefy man who faintly resembled a loaf of white bread in a chef's coat interrupted Kelly's eye roll. What are you girls doing out here? Grace pointed with a trembling hand to the mountain. My sister is in there with a guy I don't trust. Suspicion flickered in his eyes, and he folded his arms across his massive chest. I'm not interested in your teen drama. But no one should be in the park after hours, Grace said. Kelly motioned toward the gate. I bet they got in because of your negligence, she said, sounding a lot like her attorney mom. I think you should call security before they get hurt and sue the park. Something like that could cost a lot more than just your job. The man flared his red nostrils, unclipped the phone hooked to his belt, and turned away. He went back through the gate and clanged it shut behind him, locking them out. Kelly elbowed Grace. Just because she leaves the park doesn't mean she'll leave the prince. She'll have to come home sometime, Grace said. Of course, Kelly said with a big "not" embedded in her tone. Two men in security uniforms strode into view. They said something into their walkie-talkies before splitting up at the edge of the mountain. Now what? Grace asked. We can either wait here until the park opens or what? I don't know. Eat a donut? Grace rubbed her hand. It hurt from its brief contact with the prickly hedge. Stupid Heather. Stupid prince. I know. Let's find the dwarfs. I bet they'll know how to find the prince. But I don't know how to find the dwarfs. They've always found me. Maybe Brock or Cordelia knows. Kelly swallowed. Grace swallowed. Kelly's suggestion made sense, but it didn't make her feel any better. She pulled the Oldsmobile keys from the pocket. I have to return my grandparents' car before they know it's missing. She would have also liked to have returned Heather before anyone knew that she was missing also, but Grace didn't know how to make that happen. And how was she going to explain the dog? 20 miles and 15 minutes later, they arrived at her grandparents' house. The windows, blinds, and curtains were all drawn, making it impossible to tell if anyone was awake yet. The garage door was still open, as they had left it, but that didn't tell Grace anything. After she parked, Grace handed Kelly the keys. Put these back on the rack. I'll go check on Hans, Kelly said. Are you going to? She pointed her chin at Brock's house. Grace nodded. Nerves roiled in Grace's belly as she stood on the front porch of the fairy tale house, waiting for Brock to answer. Next door, Mrs. Robertson's Yorkies barked in chorus. Because of her tour of his house last night, Grace knew Brock slept in the downstairs bedroom. She made her way through the side gate and followed the path to his window. She rapped on the window. Nothing. She knocked harder, making the doggy chorus sing louder. Brock pushed back the shutters and opened the window. A red line, probably from his pillow, ran down his cheek, and his hair looked as if he'd stuck his head out of a moving train. He focused his drowsy eyes on Grace. My sister is missing. Grace bounced on her toes, trying to stay warm. He raised his eyebrows, which she took to mean, why the heck would I care about your sister? I last saw her with Prince Charming. She looked dazzled or spellbound or transfixed or something. I don't know who else to talk to. I need to find the dwarfs. I don't, Brock began. Grace cut him off. Maybe your mom knows how to find them. Brock heaved a sigh before disappearing into the room for a moment. He returned with his phone pressed against his ear. They waited. She's not answering, he told her. He typed out a quick text. My mom's not the best at answering her phone. Do you know where she went? Switzerland. She found a book full of chocolate recipes. It was Grace's turn to raise her eyebrows. Some people think chocolate is magical. Grace thought about this. True, she said. Any idea how we can find the dwarfs? Brock rubbed his nose and twisted his lips, something she'd seen him do in Spanish class during a quiz. I have an idea, he said, but it's not a very good one. Let me get dressed. I'll meet you out front in 5. Kelly and Hans were waiting for her when Brock slammed out his front door a few minutes later. He ruffled Hans' fur. He seems real enough, he said. I know, right? Kelly gazed down at the dog, wonder and adoration glistening in her eyes. Are you going to keep him? Brock asked. I have to, Kelly said. I feel like I sort of created him. I wonder how it works, Grace said. Right now, there are too many things to wonder about, Brock said. The most important one is where Heather is. Grace shoved her hands into her hoodie's pockets. Has your family noticed yet? Brock asked. They're all still asleep. Fortunately, I think maybe they won't worry as much if they wake up and all 3 of us are gone. What's your idea? Kelly asked Brock. I know this guy, and he seems to know everything about everyone. We can ask him if he knows how to find the dwarfs. That's it? Kelly asked. A guy who knows a guy? What about your mom, the fairy tale collector? Brock bristled and straightened his shoulders. I tried her, okay? She didn't answer. His tone made her feel badly. She tried to imagine a mom who left for days at a time without checking in on her every 5 minutes and couldn't. It hurt to think of her mom being any other way than she was. Sure, Jeannie made mistakes. She let people, namely Grandpa and Grandma and Dad, take advantage of her, but Grace absolutely knew that her mom loved her. Jeannie was just as likely to leave Grace alone while she went on a trip to Switzerland as she was to book a flight to Mars. Grace knew for proof positive that On Jeannie's list of priorities, Grace was in a dead, even tie with Heather and Toby. She didn't know all the things on Cordelia's priority list, but she wasn't so sure where Brock fell. "Do you want to come or not?" Brock asked. "Of course," Grace said, meeting Kelly's gaze. A few minutes later, they were in the BMW heading down the parkway towards Saddlehorn Mountain. "Who's this guy we're going to see?" Kelly asked. She and Hans sat in the back while Grace was in the passenger seat beside Brock. "Jax Tuttle. He owns the Jax Junction." "The biker bar?" Grace asked. Brock adjusted his seatbelt and bit his lip. "He's this big guy, but he's like this little old lady who loves gossip." "How do you know him?" "He's Amy and Oliver's uncle. I first met him when a pack of coyotes were picking off the Clark's chicken. Mr. Clark, a straight-laced attorney, tried animal control first, and when that didn't work, he called his brother. Jack showed up 5 minutes later and set up camp with his rifle. We started talking. I seriously think he runs a biker bar for the thrill of being in the canyons down low." "You think the dwarves are in the canyon?" Brock eased off the gas as the parkway narrowed to a 2-lane road and descended into the canyon. "Where else would they be? I can't really see them staying at the Mirage Inn, and we know they're close by. I bet they're camping at the park, and if they are, I bet Jax knows about it." Although the Hardy Oak Canyon Road was less than 3 miles from the center of Santa Magdalena, the canyon looked like it belonged on a different planet. Gone were the groomed green belts with the perfectly pruned roses. Things, including plants, people, and animals, were wilder in the crevice between Saddlehorn Mountain and the rolling foothills. Oak trees formed an umbrella that sheltered the road from the sun. Bikers roared their Harleys from the Aliso Creek Trail to the Santiago Canyon. Mountain bikers headed for the Wilted Ranch, and hikers wandered off the trails. Campers and vagrants stayed in the Neil Ford State Park. The only place serving food was Jax Junction. Grace had never been inside Jax because it was a bar, and Grandpa Hank believed that the only reason people went into the canyon was to deal drugs. Grace knew that last part wasn't true, but she also couldn't help thinking about what Grandpa Hank would say if he knew she was spending a Saturday morning in a biker bar in the canyon. But what would he say if he knew Heather was hanging out with a fairy tale character? Brock rolled the BMW off the road and parked it under the shade of a gnarled oak. When they climbed from the car, Kelly had hands cradled against her chest. "They probably won't let you bring dogs into the bar," Brock said. Kelly took a look at the men dressed in leathers hanging out on the porch. "I think he'll fit right in." "Same hairdo," Grace muttered. "I think Hans is better groomed, actually," Kelly whispered and ran a loving hand over the top of the dog's head. They picked their way through the motorcycles gathered in the dirt lot. The smell of bacon mingled with pine, and the smoke from distant campfires tinged the crisp air. Men lounging on the porch straightened as the trio passed. One of them dropped his cigarette and ground it beneath his boot, but no one pointed and shrieked, "Miners!" as Grace had feared. Kelly tightened her hold on Hans as they went through the swinging doors. The floors and walls were made of the same wide planks of wood. The bar dominated one wall, and Grace caught their reflection in the mirror behind it. They looked as out of place as she felt. "Hail, young Brockbank!" The sturdy man behind the bar raised his arm in welcome, and his face cracked with a wide grin. Brock returned the smile. "Hey there, Jax. These are my friends." He introduced Grace and Kelly. Grace tried not to stare at the crumbs of food in Jax's beard while Kelly shuffled her feet. A few of the men in the bar watched, but most went back to their conversations and breakfast. "What can I get you, man?" Jax asked Brock. "We're looking for her sister." Brock motioned toward Grace. "She look like you?" Jax asked her. "Yes," Grace felt a swell of hope. "Well, I haven't seen her, and I would have remembered a pretty thing like that," Jax said, and he braced his hands on the bar and leaned toward them. "How about a guy with a French accent?" Brock asked. "A Prince Charming kind of guy." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Haven't seen any pretty boys around here either." "Forget pretty," Brock asked Jax about the dwarfs. Interest lit Jack's eyes. "Now, I can help you. Word is those guys are camping in the park." "I knew it." Brock looked really proud of himself. "But what do they have to do with your sister?" Jax asked. "Want me to send some guys to corkscrew their arms?" "No, please." Grace didn't know who Jax would be sending for the arm screwing, but she was pretty sure it wouldn't be a fair fight. "We just want to know if they can find the Prince Pretty Boy." Jax seemed satisfied. "They're at the campground, huh?" Brock asked. Jax bobbed his head. "You sure you don't want me to send some heavyweight in there for you?" "I'm sure," Brock said. "Hey, thanks." They made their way back to the car and headed for the state park. It looks like a really big park, Kelly said when they pulled up to the gate. And they're really little guys, Grace said. Brock pointed the BMW down the dirt road, passing ramshackle trailers, scarred pickup trucks, brightly colored pop-up tents, and blanket-swaddled people sleeping on picnic tables. We're never going to find them, Kelly moaned. I don't think we're in Orange County anymore, Grace murmured. We are, Brock assured them. For the first time ever, Grace thought Grandpa Hank might have been right, as a man dressed in only a tight pair of jeans, cut off mid-thigh, crossed the road in front of them. He disappeared into a stone building that probably housed the restrooms. Brock whistled. Oh my golly, they're real, Kelly exclaimed, pointing to the left. There, in the shadow of a towering pine, the dwarfs had set up camp. 2 ropes strung between trees draped a variety of brightly colored blankets and quilts, making a long rectangular canopy. One man stood beside a struggling fire, poking at it with a stick. A few more gathered around the table, stirring bowls with long-handled spoons and chopping vegetables with wicked-looking knives. One was doing jumping jacks and kicking up small puffs of dirt with his boots. Another stood in front of a mirror that had been hung from a tree. He had a razor in his hands and looked as if he wasn't quite know what to do with it. They all stopped whatever they were doing when Brock parked the BMW in front of their campsite. Brock lowered his window. The men peered back at him, suspicion lighting their eyes. Hey guys, Brock began. How are ya? No one answered. Tough crowd, Kelly whispered. Hans growled, but no one took him seriously. We're looking for Grace's sister, Brock said. We think she might be with Prince Charming. The men drew closer to the car and collectively stared at Grace. She waved at them, trying to act friendly. We're looking for him too, Prof answered. Well, that's not good, Kelly muttered. That's Prof, Grace whispered to Brock and Kelly. He's the ringleader. So you don't know where he is? Brock asked. The dwarves all shook their heads. Then the smallest one, with pointy ears, leaned over to whisper to the guy who was always smiling. What? Grace asked, hating people who kept secrets. Blanche Neage would probably know. Why would she? I thought you said they weren't speaking, Grace said. She's his true love, though, duh, an angry-looking dwarf said. So how can we find this Blanche? Brock asked. We found her at the Mirage Inn, the dwarf with the reddest nose said. She's driving all the maids there crazy. Brock gave Grace and Kelly a look with an unspoken question. Should we? In his eyes. Grace had driven by the Mirage Inn dozens of times, but she'd never been inside. The hotel with its cluster of bellboys and valets was just waking up when Brock pulled the BMW onto the stone circular drive past a 2-story fountain. She felt as if the pair of lions flanking the wide glass doors were looking down their snouts at her. Their gazes seemed to say, you must wear Prada to enter here. Kelly and Brock didn't look like they shared Grace's inhibitions. Brock, with his messed hair and square unshaven chin, tossed his keys to the waiting valet as if this was something he did every day. Kelly, dressed in pink pajama pants, dotted with panda bears and bow ties, climbed from the car, clutching Hans, and padded into the luxurious foyer. In her jeans and hoodie, Grace felt completely out of place. She tried to imagine how the dwarves would feel, but as the little men rolled their big red van with the words "Go big or go home" scrawled across the side up to the curve, they didn't look at all intimidated by the swank. They clambered from the van, swarmed into the hotel's lobby, and marched up to the front desk. We need to see Blanche, Prof said. The woman behind the counter blinked at the doors. I'm sorry? Is she a guest? What are you sorry about? The cranky one grumbled. You don't need to be sorry unless you're in cahoots with her. Calm yourself, the shy one said, putting a restraining hand on the other's arm. He winked at the woman behind the desk. I'm sure this nice woman wants to help us. The nice woman opened her mouth to say something, but another dwarf interrupted her. Found her! He cocked his thumb toward the exit, and all the dwarfs hustled his way. Excuse me, where are you going? The woman called after the retreating dwarfs. You can't just wander the grounds. No one paid her any attention. Kelly, Hans, Brock, and Grace ran after them. How did you find her? Grace asked as she jogged beside Prof. Easy, Prof said, pointing to a second-story window surrounded by birds. See? Blanche attracts creatures. The dwarves hurried over to the side of the building, away from the curious stares of the valets and bellboys. Prof cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, Hey, Blanche! The birds twittered and swooped around the window, but Blanche didn't respond. What if it's not her window? Grace asked, glancing toward the front entrance, expecting to see a security guard or a posse of bellboys coming their way. It is, the grumpy one muttered. Maybe she's still asleep, Kelly suggested. It's only 7. She always wakes us up at dawn, one of them said, as if that was a perfectly insane time to be awake. Maybe she's not there, Grace said. Oh, she's there, Prof said. Otherwise, the birds would leave. The little men exchanged glances. Then, reaching an unspoken mutual consent, one climbed on to another's shoulders. What are they doing? Kelly hissed. Grace watched, open-mouthed, as the dwarfs scaled each other, forming a weaving human tower. What if she's in the shower or naked? Brock asked. You're going to get arrested. Do you want to find the prince or not? Prof demanded. He was number 3 on the dwarf totem pole, and his face was turning bright red. The littlest, the last to climb on, scampered up the human mast, using belt loops and shoulders to hoist his way to the top. Once there, he shooed away the birds and pounded on the window. Seconds later, the window opened, and a woman with dark hair and fair skin stuck her head out. Bonjour, Simple. How lovely to see you. What brings you here? We want the mayor, Blanche, Prof called out. All the dwarfs began to nod their heads, throwing the tower off balance. They swayed dangerously. Grace backed away. I told you I don't have it, Blanche said. Now, if you don't mind, please go away. She started to close the window, but then stopped. Why, hello! What a lovely creature. Kelly stroked Hans' fur. Thank you. He's a sweetie. Blanche looked momentarily confused, but her smile returned. I was talking about you, she pointed at Grace. Who are you? I'm Grace James. Goodness, that's a nice name. Why, I do believe you might be the fairest creature I've ever met. Thanks. We're looking for Grace's sister, Brock said. We think she's with Charmant. Blanche huffed out a sigh. That dweeb. We have to find him, Grace said. I'm sorry. I would like to help you just because you're so beautiful, but I'm afraid I can't. I'm through with Charmant. He's shallow and vain. A security guard rounded the corner. He had one hand on his gun at his hip and the other held a walkie-talkie to his mouth. He scowled at the towering dwarfs. Simple must have seen him because he grabbed the window and launched himself into the room. Shrieks and scuffling sounded from the open window. The dwarfs dismantled in a series of somersaults and cartwheels. Don't mind us, Prof said to the security guard as he climbed to his feet and took off running. The dwarfs scattered. You with these guys? The security guard asked. Kelly shook his head. We were just bringing my dog out to do his thing. The guard frowned at the dog and Hans growled in return. Simple stuck his head out the window. Room 211, come on up. Blanche shrieked again and Simple disappeared momentarily but quickly resurfaced. I called the front desk. They'll buzz you in. The guard looked at Simple, the dog, and the 3 teenagers. What's going on? I wish we knew, Brock said. Okay, that's the end. Stay tuned.